what are the handful of things now as a futurist that are happening today that you can look back on and say, these are things that we thought about 10 years ago that are maybe leading to what's going on today. And as a result, maybe are things now changing over the next 10 years that maybe you weren't thinking about before?
Again, the joy of being a futurist is you're caught a little less off guard than others are. So I would argue that so much of what is happening, I guess, let me back up. We have been advocating for changes in behavior and changes in practices for years and years and years, like for at least 10 years, talking about more conscious business, at least the 5 or 7 years, talking about more adaptive, more sustainable businesses, talking about including technology more, et cetera. And always we're getting this pushback that it was, too difficult, too far ahead, too unpredictable, too insecure, too impersonal, too expensive, too whatever, all the list of twos. And so inertia really set in. It's been really, really frustrating. And what's been fascinating right now, for those of people who, again, I let me just always start these conversations by saying I'm really privileged to not be in the epicenter of a hotspot. No one in my family is threatened at this moment. We're not living on the edge where we have to stand in line for food. So it's a very privileged position to be in right now and be able to kind of talk about this space beyond the moment that we're in. But when you think about that, it's been fascinating to watch, how many people have made this pivot, right? Everyone's had to make this shift en masse immediately. It's fascinating. My favorite headline of this whole pandemic is the 1.1 million school children in New York City had to move to remote learning within a couple of weeks. Like if you would, I just find that breathtaking, and with some success and some failures and some frustrations and some angst and all that, but the fact is people are moving into this world, and to watch the confessions that are coming from various business leaders who are talking about how they wish in hindsight that they had moved their businesses more virtually, they had been building some of this capacity, that they had sort of foreseen some of this, which has been really humbling, and I think not humbling but encouraging to see that they can reflect on that and realize that they could have been better prepared for some of this. And so I think that creates this real big opening right now for people to say, okay, now that I dove into this deep end, right, and I realized it wasn't so bad. You're hearing story after story about people who are having tremendous success by being able to have these kinds of conversations online, or are able to be really productive when they work from home, even though their children are there. Or are recognizing, other kind of resiliencies that telemedicine or potential of e-voting or whatever can create. So I'm seeing this big awakening, which I think is very, very encouraging. The question is, whether or not we still, everyone wants to get back to normal, and most of us believe there will be no more normal now that we've experienced this, right? It will have lasting impact. So there's a technological component, and I think that people also think that we did it. We jumped into the technology future and we're here. And my work now is to say, yes, you did the very first bit of it, right? You woke up to the fact that these tools are available and that you can survive them, and they can actually present all kinds of benefits and successes that you didn't expect that they would, and connectivity that you didn't expect that it would. Isn't that fantastic? Now, imagine, and we start listing all the rest of it, right? So we are only 1% into all the technological change that will be impacting our work and our lives and our way we do everything. So I think the fact that people are awoken is really good. And the fact that they're surviving it is great. So then I spend more time thinking about, okay, well, what are the other technologies that we need to be preparing for? Thinking about, certainly the two biggest issues that I think about right now is that we are also really aware of the inequities that exist in our society. We've been talking again about that for a long time, and we've been watching it grow and grow and grow, but now it's like full front and center, right? Who can remote work and who can't? Who can be online or not? My daughter's studying still many, many, many hours a day, and kids in LA, a third of them can't even get online. So whether you've got a health safety net, a financial safety net, any of these kinds of things we're seeing. And so it's been phenomenal is to watch governments and business leaders and communities coming to try and address those gaps. The question is, what about that behavior will be sustainable? What about that awakening and that insight will change policy and change the way we think about things and do things into the future? What kinds of gaps is it creating? What kinds of gaps is it filling? So I think there's a whole bunch in that whole world of equity and inequity that we need to discuss more. And then again, a technological future, and Stephen, I'm sure would agree with me on this, is will it continue to exacerbate? Like I really do believe he or she who holds the algorithm is going to have a tremendous amount of power. And we need to think through that better and how we distribute productivity in the future. And what are some really innovative solutions that we can think to or look to for that. And then the third is around the environmental health and well-being, right? Whereas the whole world has stopped. The one thing I did not predict in any of this was that the whole world was going to stop, that no planes would fly and no cars would be on the road and all stores would close and all economic activity would come to a halt. I mean, that to me, if you'd written the sci-fi version of that, I wouldn't have believed it. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it's happening is giving us a chance to see how the planet is responding. And as we see the impact that our consumptive behavior has on it, will it change how we want to do things moving forward? Right? As we get used to having some clear skies in Beijing and in India and in Mexico City, and water's running clear, and you can hear the sounds of birds and all these things that people are reporting, surprisingly, is already taking place. Will we want to jump on a plane quite as quickly and fly somewhere? Now that we've got these technologies, will we, be more satisfied by doing things in a more virtual way? So I think I'm hopeful that there will be a more symbiotic relationship between economic vitality and environmental sustainability. That the tug of war, which we see right now, I mean, the only reason the environment is feeling good is because, the environment, the economy is completely paralyzed. So as we resume this, will we take into consideration that in a more thoughtful way? So those are the kinds of things that I think that, again, we've been talking about, but now that everyone sees them, how will they change our behaviors in a more dramatic and hopefully in a more successful way?
Do you think we have and I completely agree with you. Like one of the articles I read was, for the first time in India, you could see the Himalayas because all of the smog had lifted because of lack of car traffic and everything else.
But just imagine that as a citizen there, that all of a sudden you look, oh my God, like there's also congestive things in the sense that people probably are feeling better. They're not breathing all that stuff in. But the fact that just as a human, you can now see this environment around you and realize what you've been doing to it. Like it just has to have some sort of impact on you.
Do you feel like that there's leadership in both government and private industry that can recognize, in a ironic way, the benefits that are going on right now, and there's a willingness to come together to take advantage of those things? One of the things that you talked about on one of your videos was vertical agriculture and China's interest in doing these vertical gardens, right? And the benefit of being able to do it in a much smaller area, the benefit to the environment, reducing carbon footprint, but at the same time being able to feed 24 million people. Do you think, based on your relationships experience, that there is enough intestinal fortitude between the public and private sector to take these things on and say, look what we can do, and how do we do it?
Well, that's a really, really, really big question. And I usually look at it sort of outside the system. It was actually interesting. I did an interview like this with a bunch of 60 doctoral students from USC School of Social Work yesterday. And they are really in there trying to drive systemic change and really trying to figure out how to go into a current system and figure out how to shift it. And I think I'm always going from outside the system and trying to figure out how I can penetrate it and get people to kind of either look at something differently or tunnel underneath it and figure out another solution, because I think it's really hard to shift institutional stuff. Here's what I'm encouraged by. Well, so there's many different things that pop in. One, first of all, this whole idea of what China had done. So China, outside of Shanghai, just for those who are watching it, are proposing that there would be this 100-hectare urban farm that we built right into the city center. And so the urban agriculture was not just done for aesthetics or even for air quality, but literally intentionally to grow food and be able to create less food scarcity or remoteness between food and urban area, and which I think feeds into this thing that I think is going to have people want things to be more localized, right? Whether it's on a national basis or on a, even on a county basis or a city basis, I think people are really paying attention a lot more to what local means. And so I do think that there will be this movement to want to think through those kinds of solutions that allow us to be more secure. Unfortunately, sometimes also just like sort of, wanting to put borders in so we feel safer. But if you do it from the more generous lens, that we just want to make sure that our community is really strong and well taken care of, that they will be more open to those kinds of solutions. So the Shanghai one is, an extraordinary example of it. Again, made possible because of advancing technologies that allow us to do urban agriculture that way through, again, artificial intelligence and hydroponics and all the things that make that viable. Will those things be more people have more of an appetite for them now? Yeah, I do think that will be. What I think on the government side has been fascinating is to see how quickly regulation can shift and change when there is a need for it to. And I think hopefully that wakes people up to realize that this inertia, again, that sits inside some of these systems can actually be shifted much more quickly, and there'll be more of a drive to do that and a demand for our leaders to do that. So I hope that they're just sort of by shaking the core of it, it sort of loosens up some of the calcification that makes it possible to do these changes. And there's more, again, desire for people to do that. I think on the business front, the most encouraging thing, there's two things that I think that are really encouraging is we've been advocating a long time for uncommon partnerships and the idea that you would actually even collaborate at some point with your competitors. And work that was done out of Tata Consulting Group showed that only 5% right now business leaders thought that that was even a remote strategy. Like, they just thought that seemed crazy. And now you're seeing huge competitors that are working together to solve these really big problems, whether it's Apple and Google that are working together to figure out a contact tracing application, or I was just watching yesterday the CEO of GSK, big pharmaceutical company, working with one of their big competitors, Sanfo, to figure out how to do vaccination development and distribution in a much more robust and really accessible way, really fast. So I wonder if those behaviors are going to continue, right? We're going to realize that we can be retail competitors, but we can be innovation collaborators and what that allows for. Those are the kinds of things that encourage me. It's like, where did all those behaviors that we were told like we're never going to be able to happen, that we get to see now happen? How will they then open up capacity and new ways of doing things and sustained ways of doing things moving forward?
Well, Nancy, actually, I thought of you this morning. I was going through the news and I had seen an article about how this next round of economic stimulus that's going to be pushed through the government is like a $2,000 a month stipend until the economy recovers. I'm like, so when you call it universal basic income, it's bad. But when you call it economic stimulus, it's good.
I know. And what we get to see again, I wrote that essay recently about what we will know and what we won't know 6 months from now. What we will know is the impact of at least a short-term economic stimulus / UBI / whatever. And it's happening around the world. So you're going to see different countries that have responded in different ways and can learn from those, what do I call it, those initiatives, how the impact that it has on people and on the communities and on the economy and et cetera. So I think there's a lot we get to learn. Like, there's this amazing lab that's happening right now with this, right? And I think, to your point, now that people realize, again, we have been talking about UBI for 8 years. And it was so much pushback from the beginning that no, it's so anti-American. You can't pay people for not working. That is so crazy. And now that it's sort of already become a part of what rescue looks like, I think it'll become something that people are more familiar with or comfortable with or potentially advocate for more. Here's the reality. It also sets up this question about when we have more job displacement because of technology, how will we handle that? I've been talking a lot about how we create better scaffolding to the future. When even if some people do believe there'll be more jobs, I believe that we'll have less, but there are people who believe that we'll have more. It's still gonna be completely different jobs that need to be retrained and reskilled for. And how quickly can we do that? And so there will be people who are stuck in the crosshairs of that, where a company lays off a whole bunch of people. Well, now that the whole government, the whole country has laid off people or furloughed people, we run into rescue. Will we still want to do that? Will we be better prepared? Will we be more compassionate? And we start to see this happen en masse with, as a technological wave comes through. So I think, again, the good news is that we've been awoken to this as a potential way of solving that problem. Now, the interesting thing is, will we in the future tie that more to the work that you do, Stephen, which is re-education, right, and learning? Someone sent me, I did a talk recently for something online, and one reached out to me with a beautiful white paper that she had written about a Marshall Plan for education, in which we use this time and we use the stimulus to really be not just ensuring that people can, pay their rent and pay for food, which is critical, but also incentivize them in some ways to start learning about these things that the future will need. So the hope is that there's another wave that this is connected to.
Yeah, to capitalize on that, you said, when you started, we're seeing, as a result of what's going on right now, a lot of economic disparities that maybe I think people were ignoring, right? It's gone back and forth. It's government yelling at private sector and private sector yelling at government, everybody in denial about the whole thing. But with each sort of industrial technological revolution, there's a set of people that continue to be kind of left behind. And we've seen that now the last 20 years, right? We've had a significant technology revolution. There's a lot of people that have been left behind from a skill set standpoint and education standpoint. We're noticing the effects on that now of who the pandemic truly seems to be affecting more than anybody else.
Right.
So as we're shifting, and as of right now, like you mentioned, this next shift may happen more quickly than anything else. How do you grapple with the next wave of people that may be left behind with an existing population of people that's left behind from the last revolution? It's a major problem.
Well, I hope that again that we have people's attention. We can start talking about this. I mean, right now, another futurist, Ross Dawson, wrote a great little piece about the fact that we're basically, we're trying to manage two things simultaneously: survival and reinvention. And how do you keep your focus on both? And I will tell you, every week the mood changes. Right? We move from like shock and mourning and disappointment to fear to kind of resolve to then getting more interested in what some of the solutions are. So I don't think we've fully moved through that emotional arc yet to the point where we can really start to embrace, what comes next. But I do think that we need to pay attention to this, and hopefully somebody is connecting the dots between where we are now to where this is headed. Because I think my only worry is that everyone thinks that we just got through this, we get to the other side, and we're going to be, figuring out the new normal. And I'm like, another woman, Alicia Abate, who I spoke with yesterday, describes it as a lightning bolt in the middle of a tidal wave. So we're concentrating on the lightning bolt, but the reality is there's a tidal wave that's still coming, and we need to be paying attention to both. And so the good news is, again, we've shaken up some of our behaviors and our ways of thinking. So when the tidal wave hits, maybe we're better prepared. The thing that really concerns me is there was work that was done out of Harvard, and we've been trying to actually trace back to the actual origin of this stat. But even if you give, 10% plus or minus, the Future of Work Studies program there estimates that it's possible that 38% of the population will not be able to be reskilled or upskilled in time for the work that needs to be done. Right? Even before we were into this pandemic, we had 6 or 7 million jobs that were unfulfilled because they didn't have the right talent in the right place to be able to do the work. So even if they're off by 10, if it's 25%, right, that is a huge number of people who will be left out of what it is that's happening forward. So how do we fix that? And are all those people capable of being retrained and upskilled in time? I think that there's, all kinds of barriers in the way to be able to make that happen. So as a society, how will we manage that? And how do we think about that? But again, UBI was insane and considered absolutely crazy 8 years ago. And here we are. The president's writing his own name on that check.
That's right. Well, and I guess the concerning thing when it comes to that is when normal gets back in order again, that the speed at which industry is going to have to ramp back up all over again, that those are the times where all of these ideas almost seem like they're forgotten, and we need to get back to work as quickly as possible. Even a few years ago, we were interviewing local companies in Sterling Heights about talent and, biggest needs. And one of the companies said, look, we've got very low scale jobs that we can't fill. So instead of waiting around to try to find people, we're just going to build more machines to do that very rudimentary production level job, which then, of course, all of a sudden you're separating people out from the workforce when you do that. There's so many pieces out there. Who do you think is the best suited to really grab onto that concept of re-educating the workforce and pulling it forward? I know there's tons of government programs.
Yeah,
I think some of them don't work.
Well, I think we have to figure out where we're headed to. So the first thing on that, there's 3 points there. So the first is on this idea that we're going to replace workers with robotics because we can't get skilled away. The fact is, I have a friend of mine who's another futurist, Byron Reese, who believes that any job that a robot or a computer can do is an inhuman job. We should not be protecting jobs just to be able to make sure that people are working. Otherwise, we would never have gotten the cotton gin. So the idea is innovation is an important thing that we keep driving toward. And I don't think that innovation is bad. I'm not in any way anti-innovation. If there's a way to be able to do a more efficient process, then go for it. But the question is then, what do you do with the people that were doing that work before? And ensure that, again, when people moved from agriculture to the Industrial Revolution, right, there was a slower move from here to there. And even then it was challenging. And we had to put in a whole bunch of regulations around that. We had to figure out how to make child welfare laws and 40-hour work weeks. And we had all kinds of climate change, environmental, what do you call it? When they had smokestacks and stuff, cleaning up the environment and the air so we didn't choke to death on some of the output. And we've instituted education where kids were educated to learn how to work in factories, which we're still using. So we haven't in any way started to build any of the social scaffolding that we need to this next fourth, whatever you call it, industrial revolution. I'll call it fourth production revolution, in which we're going to work and do everything completely differently. So I just think that there's a whole bunch of really ingenious thinking, compassionate thinking that needs to go into this. So we haven't gotten there. What I think is interesting on a more immediate basis when you think about some of this work, and I'll get to your question about who should be responsible, but I work with an artificial intelligence company here in Austin called Kung Fu AI. And one of the co-founders, Stephen Strauss, and I were chatting, and I completely agree with it. And he wrote a nice essay about it, but we both experienced this, which is out of the last 2 recessions, the companies that came out first were the ones that adopted the technology of the moment. Out of the 2000 recession, it was those who really embraced the internet and were able to realize that that was going to be a game changer for business, right? And out of the 2008 recession, it was all the people who'd paid attention to what had happened in 2007, which is with mobile and social technologies that all converged. It's a great article by Thomas Friedman about what the hell happened in 2007, but it was this explosion of technologies all converged, and the people who had an understanding of what to do with that came out of the 2008 recession faster. Our belief is that people who understand artificial intelligence and robotics are the people who will be better prepared to come out of this or be able to advance. I don't know, prepare to come out of, but we'll be able to, thrive as we move forward. There are a bunch of other convergent technologies. The book I'm reading right now is Peter Diamandis' The Future is Faster Than You Think. I work with Singularity University. I'm a big fan of Peter's. He's a very optimistic technologist. Works a lot about the commercialization of these technologies. I spend more time thinking about the human impact of these technologies. So together we're kind of a complete set and thinking about this, but it's really fascinating when you read it. I mean, as much as I know, and I know, spend more time in this world with the technologists and the entrepreneurs and the designers than most, it is still breathtaking how quickly this is going to happen. So I do think it's really important that we start to have this conversation more aggressively around how do we teach people. And I think in every single, all of us have a responsibility around that. I do a career fair for the future that Live Pictures is one of the sponsors of. This past year, unfortunately, got canceled with South by Southwest, and we haven't figured out the digital version of it yet. But I asked the kids when they put on their badges for college and high school kids, the career area that they're interested in, the technology they want to learn more about, and their own personal superpower, because I think that's the stack, right? It's about passion and curiosity. It's about really thinking this technology is fascinating, learn more about it and how it will impact whatever, from arts to medicine to manufacturing. And then what it is that I'm bringing to it, that I can ensure that when things get overwhelming or learning becomes difficult, I recognize I have this superpower that I can rest on. Because I can go into a bunch of other conversations. PwC is doing a big, huge retraining thing. And I was a part of one of their events for PwC Canada, and they had these young digital accelerators, like people in their 20s and early 30s that were part of this program. They were talking about all this re-skilling they were doing inside of PwC, but they talked also about hitting the wall. Like these are people who have all the support of their companies and their families and whatever, and they're doing this online training, and it gets really hard. And what happens when it gets hard? And the role that mentoring and coaching and your own self-care practices take into consideration. So for us, it's about just shifting a whole nother way. It's not just about learning skills. It's also about learning to be a different kind of person walking into this, and the self-awareness that comes from that, and the support structures that come from that. So I just look at it a little bit more systemically. So that was a very long, multi-woven answer to your question.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking, but I come at it from all these different places.
I know you want to get into the discussion about mindset and what happens to younger people when they get to something that's hard. They like to give up really quickly because everything else they have access to is very easy to do, and they get more reward out of doing it.
Let me be really clear. We have trained them to be that way as the parents who have helicoptered and snowplowed all the way through. So we have not taught our kids a great deal of resilience, which I think is a really scary thing right now. And fascinating, like one of the things I think that will be an outcome of this is that there are kids who are becoming much more resilient. Thinking about, because they're watching their parents also become, by the way. And so hopefully for a group of those kids, they will have now realized that they can get over something actually quite challenging. But yeah, I mean, I don't fault the kids as much. I fault the environment around them in which we, I would go back to school nights when my kids were in middle school, and the teachers would tell me about, I can log onto the calendar and find out what all their test dates were and their projects were due. And I'm like, not my job. That's my kid's job. And so we had a big sign in our kitchen that said, solve the problem yourself. And our role was just to provide support. If you need poster board, if you need some tutoring, if you need, a good meal, like I am here, tell me what you need, right? But I'm not in any way going to do it. But I think that is a very small portion of the population. And we're seeing it actually now as the parents are homeschooling their kids, how they are bringing that same sense of like, they have to bring this, like, everything that they did in their classroom now into the home, and they're judging themselves very harshly for not being able to live up to some crazy expectations of, replacing school in a way that doesn't make sense at home. And actually I would argue that pedagogy is out the window anyway. So anyway, well, there's resilient kids.
The words, "I'm not doing your homework for you," have been said quite a bit in our house the last 5 minutes.
But that's good. That's really, really good. I think our jobs are to keep our kids motivated. Right now, when grades and stuff are so, in my daughter's program, which again we're very, very lucky. It's a public school program, but it's a very, wealthy neighborhood and a lot of professional parents who are part of this whole thing. And they decided they're only going to get 1 grade a week. And so there's a bit of my daughters who are like, why the hell am I doing any of the rest of this stuff? I'm like, because you were curious and you just want to learn and you want to make sure you're set up well for next semester. So like, you don't just give up because you don't get the fucking grade, excuse my language. But so I think it's about helping them orient to what's important and what's not important, and giving them some time. She only has 3 or 4 hours a day in class. She did it in bed. But I literally took a picture and I sent it to a friend. I'm like, this is working from bed. This is what this looks like. We've got a whole new set of expectations around this stuff. But we're learning. We're figuring out what works and what doesn't work. My heart went out to. I was on a conference call yesterday with a bunch of. I work with people in the retail industry. I'm an advisor to Retail Tomorrow and the Future of Retail. And one of the people that's on the team is this amazing powerhouse woman from Intel. She's just amazing. Every conference call, she is like on it. And yesterday she was just like, she's just been flattened by having to be at home and homeschooling 2 kids in addition to doing a demanding job. And that was a very different her on the call yesterday. So I do think having a lot more compassion for each other is really important right now.
Steve and Stacy, I am like totally monopolizing the questions, and I'm sorry. I'm curious. So
I get like at least once a month phone calls with Nancy. So they tend to go. They tend to go long.
He's very patient with me because I don't always respond right away, but he makes sure that we do. Yeah, no, I love the reason I think I postponed on calling you back is I know it's going to be a really long call and it's going to be so much fun.
Yep. I can only imagine that I actually gone down to Austin.
When you're on how Steve and I met, that we were both on a panel on the future of AI, and we talked a lot about this. And I was so impressed by how much attention he's paying to the education side of it, to the training side of this, to making this stuff feel accessible and non-scary. He's doing it in that lens. I'm doing it by working with a company that's trying to bring really practical AI to business and not trying to make it feel like this big, huge, scary thing. Like, how can we break it down and make it smaller and more, again, accessible so that people will embrace this future and be building it actively. We need people of all kinds of backgrounds that are in this work, not just, pristine machine learning engineers from a very, discrete, homogenous either program or group of people. We need everyone in. So how do we make this more accessible? So that's why I like hanging out with Stephen.
Well, what a great opportunity for me to share some news then. I mean, I don't want to diminish your time here, Nancy, but I just worked out an arrangement with a company that provides training for kids in AI and virtual reality and 3D work and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to be able to offer those classes right at Velocity Center, Luke.
Great.
I mean, it's so important. So important.
So I have a question. The chamber represents about 1,100 primarily small businesses. So you're looking at people with probably under 20 employees who have, lots of them have been in business doing what they've done for many, many years. How do you see the future of our small businesses changing as we come out of this into this new normal? How do you see some of these places that can rebuild, rebrand, restructure, or reinvent themselves?
It's funny because we've been doing our social distance happy hours in our neighborhood in our little cul-de-sac. So we were out there last night. And at the end, one of my nneighbors who has a small business started asking me all these similar questions because he reads my stuff, and more people now in my neighborhood are curious about what I do. And we made a date to have a longer conversation because I think, here's my thing. I don't do a lot of really fancy forecasting. I don't do scenario planning. I don't do a whole bunch of stuff. I ask just 2 questions. What does the future need and expect of us? And what am I in a unique position to create and contribute to that future? And if I can just marry those 2 things together, then you've got your path. And so the thing it requires is that you spend a little time thinking about what the future needs and expects. So I guess I would ask these small businesses, even mine, right? I mean, the last couple of years, I've had most of my income in keynote speaking in big, huge venues around the world. Well, do we think those are going to come back? Are they not going to come back? What does it mean? And so then I realized I'm not actually a keynote speaker. I'm in the content, inspiration, and delivery. Like, I just want people to understand where things are going and build more relevant paths to it. What are different ways that we can do that? So shifting back more into more consulting work. I'm finishing this book. I'm going to do virtual keynote stuff. We're going to figure out other ways to do it. But my business may not look even remotely the same coming out of this. But I have to think about what's the bigger why of what it is that I'm doing and how can that be delivered now in a different way. So the first is, can that work still be, is that work still relevant, or the service or product still relevant? Is it just distributed in a different way? As I think the first question. The second is that product or service still relevant, period. There was an interesting example that, again, Ross Dawson gave of a company that built big, huge, I think, theater sets that now quickly pivoted to making stand-up desks for people at home. And I was like, oh my God, that's called adaptive, man. Now, again, does that fill his life's purpose? You know, I don't know. But I think the fact is he wanted to make sure that he was still manufacturing, building something that, and use those skills and those resources and that talent to be able to build something that now people really needed. And so I think it's about paying attention to what people need and then figuring out what resources and equities and talent that you have to be able to deliver it in whatever way it needs to be. I think, again, it's fascinating to watch grocery stores right now that are selling restaurant stuff that are selling groceries. You know, we're seeing all kinds of people getting really, again, I think ingenious about how they use what they've got.
You know, Stacy, to kind of follow on to that a little bit, I think an organization like your local chambers or your regional chambers, whatever the case is, I think it's a great opportunity for you to provide that backbone to allow the small businesses to talk about what they could become, and bring in some people that, you know, can say, you know, like, for example, with myself, I had a pivot like that, you know, 3 weeks ago. And now I have a proposal that's going to virtually run a trade show, you know, in front of a company. So it's things like that, you know, it's where are people going to be looking for those solutions? And a lot of times, you know, who knows, this might be chamber programming or city programming, whatever the case is, but there's going to be a lot of people out there that just, they've been an accountant for 30 years. And now all of a sudden there's no tax forms. It was April 14th. What do you do?
That's a very fair thing. So I think there's two questions. One is, what is the future need to expect from a chamber? I think it's a really good question.
Exactly.
Where you guys are in that whole mix. And what we are seeing is that there are more and more share groups, so people want to get into places where they can just have this conversation and it can be off the record. One of the things that the Retail Tomorrow group is doing is they're inviting retailers, and then there'll be manufacturers and then others. Normally people were in a big ecosystem. We've been encouraging more and more ecosystems, but now they're sort of separating it out and giving people a chance on Saturday mornings just to come online and have a chance to just like roundtable it. And no press is part of it. None of the stuff goes outside the window. I'm not even invited to be part of it. It's a very discreet group of people that has a safe space to just be able to start thinking about this stuff and learning from one another and being able to be vulnerable with each other. Because that's the only great news about this happening all at the same time, is this was going to happen regardless. It just was going to happen as a slow roll over the next 5 years. And the fact that it's happening all at once means that people can share and learn with each other in a much more, again, real and vulnerable, and people are seeking the help more actively looking for this kind of stuff. So I think it's a really big opening right now to be a channel for that for people. And even talking about the personal and business integration, because I think one of the walls that's come down is the fact that we're only professionals here and we're only family members there. The fact that we're doing these things from our homes, or that we're seeing our kids run through, or that we're, again, can tell people that we're exhausted because we were up all day trying to help our daughter get herself online. I think allows people to also just recognize that even as business leaders, there are also humans in this. You know, I start all my talks talking about the fact that there's 3 lenses. We come to these things as professionals, but we are humans and we're members of society. And so we have to look at those things across 3 lenses simultaneously. When you do, then again, you have a more insight and more compassion.
Come on, Luke. I know you got another one.
I know. I can see us. I can see it.
I know, but I'm like taking up a lot of time.
That's okay. I mean, yours, if this is helpful, I'm happy to stay. If you feel like I've sort of wrapped it all up with a bow, I'm happy to do that too. Just, here's the thing. I'm spending what I think is valuable for people to understand is when I think about what the future needs and expects from me. Here's how I orient toward it, right? I have made really clear that my North Star is that I want to ensure a safe and healthy planet for everybody. I mean, that's just sort of why I'm here. And whether that's I raise my children to be resilient and creative and, hopefully, stable, or I'm doing really big things in restructuring the internet. It can go from really small to really big, but I'm investing my time in building the things that I think that people really need. One is that I do believe in artificial intelligence, and that I believe in the ethical and trustworthy use of that. I don't think that technology is going to go away. So how do we ensure that we do it? Which is by bringing more diverse people into the industry, which is about learning more about it and advocating for best practices with it, and thinking about the ethical considerations with everything we build, trying to get as close to it as possible, because I feel like the closer I can get to it, the more I can guide it, as opposed to staying away and thinking it's scary. I am ensuring that youth don't feel scared about the future, because I think that's a really, really big issue right now, is that we have scared children to death about what's going to happen, and the narrative is not empowering. And so how can I counter program against that? Again, whether it's at home or my children's friends or building the career fair for the future or any audience that I speak to, encouraging them to have a positive outlook on this for their kids. I am working on a new economic indicator that will help shift things. I think, again, there are many problems that are big, and I don't know that you can go inside to solve them. So I'm solving them from the outside. So we're working with this woman named Ryan Eisler, who's an amazing social systems thinker and has been advocating for this work for 20 years, built a whole battery of social economic indices that we're now trying to work and roll up to one index that will be a better measure of vitality and economic output for the 21st century, and replace an outdated metric that we think was really a useful indicator of a piece of the 20th century economy that is, just outlived its usefulness and was just too myopically applied. And so there's just a broader way of being able to look at that, which I think will incentivize people to think about these kinds of scaffoldings that we're talking about with unpaid work, or being able to think about the environment or think about how we hold each other as a society much more successfully if we have a metric that shows that that's really a valuable thing to go do. And then the fourth is that I'm continue to champion, I'm not working actively with them, but I continue to champion something called Holochain, which is beyond blockchain. It's a way of being able to do peer-to-peer exchanges at super scale and in microtransaction way that completely will restructure the way that we coordinate many resources moving forward. So if you go on the far horizon, I see a very different world, and that works really much more cohesively and coherently together, and much more safely together. So those are the things that I'm spending time and energy working on, because I think that I have the privilege of being able to be doing that, right? Mm-hmm. And because of that, I feel very fulfilled, and I, will figure out the economic side of it. I mean, all my income got wiped out for spring and summer. That was, so you'll also realize the importance of safety nets, whether you're the airline industry or whether you're a small business, making sure that you've got some ways to be able to weather ups and downs, I think is critical.
What industry do you think is really susceptible right now? Not only because of what's happening right now, but in terms of the impact of AI, number one, number two, the types of things that people may be learning to live without over the last 5 or 6 weeks. Well, how do those two things come together from an industry perspective that may be at risk of either not being there completely or being completely automated, that today, you need people to talk to, like the insurance industry, for example?
Right. There's a lot, you go industry by industry and figure all that stuff out. The two that I think that I would be paying a lot of attention to if I were the airline industry, thinking a lot about people and resuming travel. I think travel is going to feel really different moving out of this, now that we're realizing again that we can connect this kind of way. We're going to feel safe getting on planes and feeling good about being in that kind of environment. And thinking about the environmental impact. So I think there'll be a lot of things that there was already a thing called flight shame that was happening in Europe of people thinking about getting on planes from a carbon footprint standpoint. And I think there's going to be more and more sensitivity to that. So if I was in the, airline hospitality industry, I'd be thinking through capacity in the future and what that will look like. And I think the other thing that's been the big eye opener for people has been 3D printing and manufacturing. I think there's going to be an acceleration of people realizing that they can solve that problem in a different way. It was a fascinating story right at the beginning of this whole thing in Italy, where there was a hospital that was trying to figure out how to find a broken part for a ventilator, and they couldn't get the manufacturer to provide that part. And so they just, they had these relationships. And this is where I go back to building relationships with people who are doing technologically advanced things is really important, because you can jump in faster. Stephen is able to pivot faster because he already had the know-how about how to go do that. People who have not invested any time doing that are hard. So this hospital organization had the relationships with 3D printers that they'd already cultivated over time. And they were able to turn to those people and say, hey, can you help us fix this problem? And the people did. They were able to put this little ventilator part together for $1, right? What's fascinating, and I was waiting for this to happen, is the intellectual property issue that comes with that. So then it turns out that the person, the company that actually made that ventilator part threatened to sue the hospital for having found a solution that was so quick and easy. So I think you're going to find this kind of like fight. But the fact is, now that we realize we can go do that, right? Will that genie go back into the bottle? I don't think so. I think we're going to realize that we've got the capacity to manufacture things differently, and we can solve problems in a faster way. And I think it's a wake-up call for the manufacturing industry. So I would pay attention to that.
Got another question for you too, kind of along those lines. And I've been asking it a little bit more of some of our guests, but I go back to the popularity of why that Simon Sinek has been able to perpetuate through a lot of his TED Talks and that sort of thing. And I saw an article a couple of weeks ago that said employees working for companies are going to really be able to tell if this is the company they need to continue to work for after all of this stuff is going on. What do you think the real impact is for companies that are founded on the principle of why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we doing what we do? And how do we really impact our customers versus companies that maybe not really focused so much on that versus I just deliver a hardcore service and my bottom line is the most important thing and my employees are just part of the process of getting it done.
Well, again, I think the issue is not so much about whether or not employees will want to be part of that. I think that is huge. We've been watching that transition happen for a while, right? That people want to be they're more loyal to purpose-driven organizations and they don't feel as though they're just sort of cog in the wheel of all this stuff. But I think what's interesting is the companies that have that mindset, that have a North Star, or that have their why, are able to adapt much more quickly because they're not locked into this is what we do. They think they're okay, well, this is why I do what I do. So how can I deliver it differently? They're just much more open-minded. They're much more adaptive. They're much more resilient when it comes to that kind of thing. So it's just it's a better evolutionary perspective to have, period. I think that other part of it is, I'm finishing a book now. Actually, it was almost finished before this. And then we shifted because we're like, oh my gosh, now everybody knows everything. And the reality is they're more awake now, so we can edit it differently. But it's called Leadering. And it's a shift from leadership to leadering. And the idea is that you're moving from a noun, which is static and closed and hierarchical, to something that is fluid and open and dynamic and inclusive. It's a different way of thinking. And one of the ways we describe it is you're moving from a playbook, which everyone had like a playbook and they wanted to know what the next chapter of the playbook was going to be, like how is AI on Monday going to change my work, to now a practice. And the way you would describe it is you're moving from a map to a compass and a North Star. So that North Star is really important. It will help you figure out how to navigate in changing terrain. But if you're trying to rely on a map, you get lost really quickly when that terrain changes. The map is outdated. So what we're really trying to do is cultivate that capacity for people to realize that if you build these various practices, right, it's easier, but you must have a North Star. Otherwise you can still get lost. And so I do think that people are going to realize that that becomes the key to survival, not so much that it's just the key to talent engagement.
Right. So I've got one more question for you, and then I'm done. So I don't know if this is going to close the conversation or not, but you have mentioned, you've mentioned a number of things, just for example, the North Star, finding your North Star, thinking about the future needs and what is the future need for me. These are all sort of big strategic planning questions. So if I'm a small business now and I'm going into my next 5 years of strategic planning, right? We've come through this massive change, lots going on. Where are we going to be from 5 years? Out of all of the things that you talked about that are all critically important, they all kind of mesh at some point. What would be the one leading question if I'm a company to start this process out? What's that leading question I sit down with my leadership team and say, guys, this is what we need to think about first to start this, our.
Well, yeah, again, I'm a systems person. So for me, it's like there are multiple inputs that go into something. And some people always want to reduce it to the one thing, right? What is the one thing I need to do? Or what is the 3 steps that get me to, survive the crazy that's going to happen or the blah, blah, blah. So I'm usually less reductionist in that. However, I will say, I think at the end of the day, it probably starts with curiosity. One of the things that we talk so much about in the book is being in a place of wonder versus resistance. Because as you're watching this stuff happen around you, think about the implications of it. Right? Why does this matter? Like, why did I talk about that headline in Italy? Or why am I watching this thing happen between Apple and Google? Or why am I thinking about the privacy concerns around an immunity passport? Right? There are all these things that are happening right now that we need to be thinking about the longer implications, both positive and negative around them, and talking to people around them and learning more about them. So I think really being in a place of curiosity and wonder is huge. It lets us not deny that this stuff is going to happen, and it gives us a chance to say what if. So I was working with a company in New York that does a bunch of healthcare marketing, and I was talking to the chief medical officer who the evening before my talk went on and on about the fact that AI will never change medicine. And I was like, you know what? I would just be in a place of never saying never and saying what if? What if AI comes in and does replace a significant portion of what doctors now do, technically to augment them, not to replace them, but to give you a superpower that you didn't have before. And he kept denying. And then after he watched my talk, he came and goes, oh my God, physicians are completely unprepared. I'm going to make that my life's work now to help them catch the light. So I just think, if you can encourage people to be curious and to think what if. It opens up a whole bunch of capacity. And I will also say that this goes into our homes, into our schools, and into our organizations, how do we incentivize curiosity versus dampen it? Because what you're going to realize is many of those practices that we put in place are designed to dampen it and not in any way open it. So I would really look through what I do in all my work and my associations and affiliations and say, where am I opening capacity for curiosity and where am I killing it?
It's fantastic. I like that. Thank you
For
so
all
much.
places vendors,
Yeah,
much
this
more.
is
I say
good.
4 words that are stenciled in the entrance of my house that I use as sort of blueprint for raising my kids, which is wonder, thank, do, repeat. Right? So wonder is about being in that place of curiosity and really trusting that your curiosity is different than mine. It's like a fingerprint. Like we have completely different things that we're curious about, which is great. We should all be bringing that uniqueness to the world. It's about being in a place of gratitude for both the inspiration of that and the support of people who can help you do something with that. And then it is being in a place of confidence. You've got agency to build what it is that you think needs to be built, right? To actually go do it and then to make that a continuous cycle. So wonder, thank, do, repeat is my mantra.
It's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this was good, Nancy. Thank you.
Nancy,
Good. Good luck with everything.
I can't thank you enough for coming on today. It's been it's always a pleasure to talk to you, but to get kind of your message out to a wider audience, I didn't think I could ask for more.
Well, thank you always for your support of my crazy endeavors. I really appreciate it. And I wish you guys the best of luck. I'll have even more fun now following the news about what's happening in your part of the world. And hopefully we'll talk again soon. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks.
Stay safe. Take good
Thanks,
care.
Nancy.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.